Hello, welcome to the Parallax Forum. I'm your host, Lee Alpert. We're very pleased to have with us for this edition a gentleman who came all the way from Louisville, Kentucky to appear on our program. His name is Gerald Sklare. Jerry is a professor at the University of Louisville. He is a well-published author. And Jerry, I want to welcome you to the Parallax Forum.
Thank you.
And now I know that you are on your way back, heading south to San Diego and then going back to Louisville, but we appreciate your coming on our show. But I've got a little tie to you, and we'll tell our viewers about it. About 30 years ago was the last time I saw you at Wayne State University in Detroit, where we were fraternity brothers and went to school together.
That's correct.
And I really appreciate your coming on to do our show now that you're out here in Southern California.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
You know, a lot has gone on, and we entitled this show Preventing Columbine, Counseling Before Crisis. You have done an incredible job since I last saw you. You have gotten your doctorate degree, your master's degree in counseling. You are a full professor at the University of Louisville. You've written a book called Brief Counseling That Works. And I'd like you to tell us, if you could, a little bit about the book and how you got started and what brief counseling really is.
Well, brief counseling is it's a way to deal with, this book is about dealing with kids, school kids. And school counselors have many clients to deal with, and it's very difficult for them to, with caseloads of 300 or 400 kids, to be very effective with that number of students. So what this book does, and also people that work in mental health facilities, they can use this as well. Because they have large caseloads, and this is a way to be effective and efficient with large numbers of clients, and you can be effective with them in 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, and then you don't need to see them again. My background, my experience with that started probably about 10 years ago, where I learned about this approach, and a lot of the things in there are not new, but it's put together in a little different package.
How did you learn about the approach?
I attended a conference in the American Counseling Association, and saw a person making a presentation on it, and I was very interested because I thought this would be very appropriate for my students at the University of Louisville to learn how to do this. And as a result of attending some workshops and some training, I've been able to not only utilize it as far as teaching my students, but travel around the country presenting workshops on this so that other people can learn how to do this as well.
Now, does this brief counseling, does it deal with people that have, or, you know, and you call them clients, and that have serious mental illnesses, or is it reserved for just kind of social interaction types of problems?
Well, it actually can be used for both, because one thing that makes this approach different than other approaches is that the issues that the clients want to work on is what we work on. The therapist or the counselor does not decide what the issue is, but the client is the one who decides what they want to work on. And what we often don't take into consideration is that who knows the client best? You know, the client knows, they live in their skin 24 hours a day, and they know themselves best, so why not use that information that they have available to themselves? And what do they want to have happen? And when they discuss and they talk about things that they want to have happen, there's a lot less reluctance and resistance to the counseling process. So that's one of the things that makes it different. And the other thing that makes it different is we focus, rather than focus on problems, we focus on solutions. You know, all of us, you know, whether a person's depressed or a person's sad or a person's angry, they don't always have that problem. That doesn't always exist. There are times when that problem is not there, even during problem times. And what we fail to recognize is, how does that person make that happen for themselves? So what this approach does is help identify successes and resources that individuals have that are unrecognized. And as a result of going through this process, we're able to help people do those things more often, which means they would be doing the self-defeating things less often. You
know, if I were to play the devil's advocate a moment, I'd say to you, this sounds like a quick fix. And with all that we've learned in the mental health area and in the years that have gone on, from the types of medications that we give now or don't give, to the type of counseling that we do, to the different theories behind it, I look at you and I say, how can this possibly work when some kids have got a problem? It's got to be much more deep-seated. I mean, am I wrong?
Well, I think there's a belief that that is true, but some of the research shows that that's not necessarily true. You don't have to have insight and develop a fully go back into your history and understand the ideology and where things began. You need to know what works. I think the main thing is what works for someone. And if you can help them to identify the kinds of things that work in their life when they're being successful and have them do those kinds of things that work, then they're on the way and to having a better situation for themselves. And as a result, oftentimes little problems that, major problems that do occur are a result of some little problems that started out, and it's just kind of a ripple effect. And what ends up happening is working on some of those smaller items end up resolving some of those larger items at the same time.
Now, I've noticed that you refer to the students as clients. Mm-hmm. You've done it several times. Mm-hmm. Here in our area in Los Angeles, in the high schools we're involved with, when we see a counselor advising a client, as you call them, they call them their students. Is there a reason for referring to them in that manner?
No, I think that because this approach is used for more than just school kids, mm-hmm. Clients would refer to not only school kids, but it would refer to people that I would see perhaps on an individual basis that wouldn't necessarily be kids, parents, couples, families, mm-hmm. those kinds of folks are also, this works with those people as well. Well,
our crew will get a close-up of the book that they'll put up on the screen. But this book is a very small book. It's a brief book. And I know before we came on the air, you told me you'd written a much bigger book. What happened to the rest of it?
The rest of it's in another book.
It's in another book.
It's in another book.
Okay. So a brief book on brief counseling that works.
It fits, doesn't it?
It sure does fit. Solution-focused approach for school counselors. You've been so successful with this methodology that, in fact, the book has now been translated into Japanese, and you are considering now your publishers and doing a number of other languages, from Korean to Spanish to many other languages. Tell me, if you can, what you perceive in terms of, will this work in different cultures? Because different cultures have different beliefs. And how do you see this approach in Japan, for example, with a Hispanic or Latino community, for example? What differences are there?
I think one of the reasons this approach has been shown to be effective with different cultures is that some cultures have difficulty or aren't willing to share their problems with counselors. For example, in Japan, it's an embarrassment to talk about problems. So therefore, talking about solutions is a much more acceptable way. And the same thing in the African American community, and I think the same thing is true in the Latino community. That's just not something that we're willing to share with people very easily. It's kind of something you keep within the family. And when you're able to talk about solutions instead of talking about problems, then that's a more acceptable approach. It's more acceptable for them to discuss.
I'd like you to, for a moment, if you would, give us an example of what that means. I mean, a factual example. If a child has for example, doesn't show up at school a couple days a week, and normally the counselors come in and they talk to them about why they're not showing up at school, on a regular basis. If that were a scenario, give me an example of how your brief counseling works versus what we see them doing in our schools now.
Well, typically, what counselors would focus on, and no matter what other approaches, with the exception of this approach, they would tend to focus on the problem times. They would, if a student, for example, and there is a case that I can cite that's exactly what happened. This student was absent every Monday and Friday for most of the year, but had been there every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Had not missed a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Had missed 40% of the semester because the student wasn't there for Mondays and Fridays.
Good student, bad student, average student?
The student was an average student. But because the student wasn't there, the student was failing. So typically, counselors would talk about the problem, Monday and Friday, and what's wrong on Mondays and Fridays. Well, with this approach, we would focus on the solution. When is the kid there? When is that student in school? What's different about those days, those times when that kid happens to be in school?
And then try and make those things happen on the Monday and Friday.
Sure, and that's exactly what happened in this particular case. It seems kind of ridiculous and somewhat simple, is that the student put his clothes out. There's a chair next to his bed. the student put his clothes out on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays the night before on the chair. And then when the kid got up for school, got dressed and went to school. For whatever reason, we don't know why, and it's not necessary to know why. On Sunday nights and Thursday nights, the kid didn't put his clothes on the chair. Got up, saw his clothes not there, just went back to bed, told mom they were sick, he was sick, and never showed up. So focusing on those times when you're being successful, and that's the case with everyone, no matter what kinds of difficulties someone's having, there are times when that is not the case.
And so that child, I mean, a typical type of therapy for that child will be to try and find a reason as to why theoretically or historically the child is not putting the clothes out on the Friday, as opposed to saying, hey, you know, it works on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. If you get it out on Friday, let's see what happens.
Yeah. What's different about those days? You know, the student wanted to attend school. So what's different about those days, and how are you making that happen for yourself, and having the student discover what it was that was different, and having them do those kinds of things that are different, that they've been successful at, which will enable them to be more successful.
Now, I know you've been touring throughout the United States in this book, Solution-Focused Brief Counseling. One of the things I really want to get into, if we possibly can, is, and I understand, and I think our viewers understand, how if you're able to shorten the time of counseling and be effective, then you're able to see more students, which means that more students are being seen. But we all know about the Columbine, we know about the recent shooting down in San Diego, and unfortunately it's all over our country now, where these kids are just, you know, they're coming in with guns and they're claiming that they were picked on by bullies, by athletes, they were made fun of, and you know, and so they've gone on a shooting spree, on a killing spree. Tell us a little bit about how this theory of counseling could work to maybe prevent some of these situations, and has it?
Well, I think identifying those kids that feel, you know, isolated and lonely, and you know, where they feel they have some needs, and finding out from those kids, you know, the times when they've been successful, the times when they're not so lonely, when they're not so isolated. What are they doing to make that happen for themselves? And having identified those solution times in their lives would help them to increase those times that they aren't so lonely and aren't so isolated, which could, as a result of that, lead them to, you know, stop being so isolated and lonely, because they've figured out some ways in which they can, you know, dissipate that kind of condition. And then even, you know, I think some other things that could happen. The recent shooting down in San Diego, where the assistant principal was shot. Having those folks, even administrators, learning how to do some of these approaches, so that when the child leaves their office, they don't have such a negative impression of the school and whoever was dealing with them, because that tends to be a negative situation. Teaching them some skills so that they can help students leave with a more favorable impression, with some hope, I think, and it tends to empower people, is what it does.
Now, your book is filled with different examples and case studies, and are these all examples that have actually worked, or is this just a book in theory?
No, those are actually taken from cases that I've done, you know, in Louisville, Kentucky, in the school system. They are, I have permission from the parents to use those cases in the book, and so they're real cases, and many examples there of how to actually do it. It's a skill building book, where whoever reads the book, you know, or if they attend a workshop and then read the book, they would actually be able to implement this model. And it's very quick. You know, it takes about, you know, 40 minutes or so to do a session, and probably about 30 minutes to do a second session, and generally averaged about 3 sessions per middle school kid and 2.5 sessions per elementary kid. And usually it's about three meetings is about what you need, and then they're on their way, you know. And some of the data says that it's long-lasting too. It's not something that dissipates after a short period of time. It stays as long as it works as long as other approaches.
Now, do you suggest or recommend that every kid in the school goes through this, even the ones that we don't think are having problems, or do you kind of wait until you see a child that appears to be struggling and then bring them in and try and use this positive type of counseling session?
Well, I guess, you know, I don't know if there's enough time for counselors to work with every single child in the building. I think identifying those that seem to be struggling, having teachers help out, identifying those kids that may be having difficulty with academic issues, with vocational issues, and with personal issues. And just make, and I think what happens is word of mouth. You know, children learn from other children or other students what's going on in the building, and that happened many times with me, where some kids would refer other kids. They tell them about what's going on. One little boy, for example, I was working with, he progressed so well that his mom ended up buying him a whole lot of new clothes. Well, his cousin came in right afterwards, because his cousin said, you know, I'm having some trouble too, and I'd like some new clothes too. So that's why, and it worked very well with him too. But he was really motivated because, for some other reasons, it really weren't, you know, counseling per se, but it ended up, that's why he came in. And other kids, they refer other kids to it because it works so well. And it's a very positive approach. We focus on when things are working as opposed to when they're not. And as a result of that, and you work as a team, you know, you're not seen as an expert. You know, you use their expertise, you use their language. It gets rid of a lot of the cultural barriers, and it's a very accepting approach, which makes it a little different.
Less threatening to them.
Much less threatening to them. Much less threatening to them.
What groups do you lecture before? What kind of organizations use this? Because it's not just teachers in schools.
No, mental health agencies. In fact, you know, I today just was at Kaiser Permanente Center and Mental Health Center, and I was using it. I was training their folks. I'm going down to El Cajon tomorrow to do that in San Diego. I do it for professional organizations. I've been here in California and done it for California counselors. And I go to various professional organizations or school districts. I do it for them, and I guess as what I said, mental health settings as well. I do that. And I also teach it at the university.
Are you suggesting that this is all that's necessary for people that have emotional problems or difficulties?
Oh, by all means not. No, that's not true. This is just one, and this doesn't work with everybody. You know, I must be honest with you. I found it to be effective with about 80% of the people I work with, which is pretty successful. But it doesn't work with everybody on every single situation. It's, you know, what I find to be helpful with this model is because the clients or the students, whoever I'm seeing, they decide what they want to work on. So therefore, it covers a wide range of issues. You know, it's up to them to decide what they want to address.
Do you think that this type of counseling, brief counseling, is the type of counseling that could avoid something as drastic as the shootings that took place in San Diego or a Columbine if they just identify the students and work with them, or do they need much more than that?
I think this would help. I think this would help. I think this may, I can't say for sure it would, but I would think that there is probably a pretty good chance, because of the positive nature of this approach, and usually because students become so empowered as a result of that, they recognize some of the strengths and resources that they have that they never recognized before. And if they see that, then there's no need to pull out a gun, perhaps, and show that they have power that way. I think that's one of the things that I think would work about this with that kind of situation.
Now, you're a very bright guy, and as I said, I've known you for, you know, I haven't seen you for 30 years, and I knew you much before that, but you have a certain innate sense of being able to judge people. I have to question whether or not all of the counselors that are in schools today have that same capability. I mean, they have to really be able to judge the student, don't they, in order to apply this? And are they well enough trained in our high schools, for example, today to be able to apply this type of a theory?
Well, I think they could be trained. It's not, the model is, it's a 5-step process, and it's a little more difficult than it appears, but it's something that I believe all school counselors, and not only school social workers and school psychologists, could do as well. I don't think it's, with some additional training, workshops, for example, attending workshops would be a way, or learning it in colleges and universities. And it's becoming much more widespread. It's kind of a recent approach. It was developed in the early 80s, so it's still fairly new compared to other models of counseling. But it's still not as well known as it's probably going to be. It's something that I find that works much more effective than anything else I've ever done. Yeah.
What's the next step? I mean, where do you go, you know, next? I mean, we're always trying to make things better, and your book, Brief Counseling, has been out for a bit, and you know, you say it's been in the 80s. What do you see as the next step along making this a more sophisticated working model, maybe reaching the other 20% that you haven't been able to get yet?
I'm not really sure. I don't know if there's any one thing that works, with that other 20%. Maybe some other approach may work. I've been pretty satisfied with being able to be successful with 80%. I've been working on a new approach that works with large groups of people. It's called solution-focused guided imagery, where you could actually work with a lot of people at the same time, 40 or 50 or 60 people at the same time with this particular approach. Did a little research with it and submitted an article, and hopefully it'll be published soon.
Tell us what that is.
Well, it's a way to go through this entire process where you have clients or students imagine what certain kinds of, whatever their issue is that they want to work on, and write it down on a little piece of paper. And there's 15 pages of like a third of a page each. Mm-hmm. And what they do is and after each section, we have them, what they imagine happening. I lead them through a little imagery, and they kind of decide for themselves, and then they write down what they were thinking about. And going through this entire process that way, and rather than me speaking to each one of them on an individual basis. And the results that we achieved we were really surprised and pretty happy with, and hopefully it will be published, and I can see it being used in some situations like gathering a group of 30 or 40 or 50 students at the same time who are having academic difficulties, and working with those 30 or 40 students that way. And that would be a very efficient way to work with a large number of people, especially when you have a large population to work with.
Now, tell me a little bit if you think that this is about the students themselves, or the clients as you call them. Do they have to want to do this, or are you able to persuade them? How do you do that?
Well, there's two kinds of students or clients that you work with. Those that are self-referred and those that are referred by others. Okay, and I think what's real important is that we call those that are referred by others who do not necessarily want to be helped visitors, okay? And those that do want to be helped to come in on their own, we call those customers. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we do with this approach is try to convert those visitors into customers. And the way you do that is if they're invested in getting something out of it, if they see it as a payoff for them by going to counseling. And that's what we try to do with some of the leads that we give them, to get them to realize that there is a payoff for them, whether it be just to get somebody off their back. The teacher that sends the kid into the counselor because the kid's disruptive in the class, and the teacher's all upset with them, and the teacher keeps on sending the kid seeing the counselor. If the kid sees that by changing some certain behaviors that the teacher's not going to be on their back anymore, then that might be a payoff for them. So that's one of the things that we try to do. Turn those reluctant or resistant clients into ones that are clients that are more willing, or customers.
Now, if you have a student or a client that you've identified as having a problem, you've gone through the brief counseling, they seem to have gotten better, mm-hmm. or at least resolved their problem because it's a positive approach to it. What do you recommend to the counselor in terms of follow-up? Do they just kind of sit back and watch, or do they bring them in and go through a follow-up session 6 months, a year, 2 months, 2 weeks?
Well, the philosophy of this approach is that you don't do that. Once you get them on their way, you don't need to continue on with them. I remember one little boy I discovered that I was working with. He was a young man who was having some academic difficulties and had just gone into a very large middle school from a rural elementary school. The middle school was 1,550 kids, and he was having a difficult time adjusting. And as a result of that, together we figured out what kinds of things where he would be more successful. And he used to fall asleep in class and not get to bed early enough, and things such as that. But after he discovered his resources, he started doing much better and turned those D's and F's into all A's and B's. And about 4 months after I saw him for the last time, I saw him 3 times, and I called him into the office. Now, he didn't ask to come in. And he said to me, when I called him in, he said, Mr. Sklare, I don't need to see you. I'm doing fine. So that was my agenda, you see. It was my agenda for him. And it's got to be their agenda, what they want to work on. So I think that, he did come in about a month later. He said, I'm still getting all A's and B's. and but I'm not answering as many questions that the teacher asks. I'm not raising my hand as much, and I want to be able to do that just like I used to. And we just focused on what were you doing before that was working, and he started doing that again, and he was back on track. So sometimes I made it a little boost. But if they want to do that.
If they want to do it. So it's a practical way of counseling, as opposed to getting into the theoretical background of the mothers and where it all came from and all the other stuff.
You don't need any, what's different about, you don't need histories, you don't need to get into history, and when you focus on solutions, counseling becomes brief. That's not the intention, but that's what happens.
And successful.
Very much so, very much so. My experience has shown it to be very, very successful.
Well, you know, it's amazing. It's an amazing theory, and the fact that it works is proven by the success of your book, by your United States tour of teaching solution-focused brief counseling, and the translation of the book into Japanese and the other languages, and you know, perhaps we can somehow prevent the Columbine-type situations, or just make our kids and our clients feel better about themselves and focus on their successes instead of their failures. You know, Jerry, I want to thank you very much for, or Dr. Sklare now, for coming on the Parallax Forum and coming all the way from Louisville, Kentucky to be here. If any of you have additional questions you might like to ask, information you might like to find out about this brief counseling theory and concept, you can feel free to please contact us at the Parallax Forum. You know how to get a hold of us, and we'll put you in touch with Dr. Sklare at the University of Louisville. Thank you very much for viewing the Parallax Forum. We'll see you at our next program. And thank you again, Jerry Sklare, Dr. Jerry Sklare, for coming to California and being with us.
Thank you. I love it here.
Just sitting. That's good. See, easy.